Hey everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, This Story Ain't Over. So today I'm coming to you finally with my March wrap up. I'm so sorry that this is so late. I decided to take a little bit of a weekend off from filming, so a lot of my videos kind of got delayed because of that, because I didn't have anything banked, but I think it was still really worth it to have that break. So that's why you're getting this like mid-month April, and I actually didn't read that much in March either, so this might be a little bit disappointing, but regardless, we're just gonna, let you know about all the books that I read. So the format of this video will be just like my previous two wrap-ups from 2021, but if you're new here, the format is basically that for every book that I read during the month, I will do a short non-spoilery review, and then it will be followed by the spoilery review, and so I'll leave timestamps and like chapters on the time bar, so you can just click to the books that you want to, hear about, and if you want to get spoiled or not. So in March, I read 4 books, and these are them, and I have a bunch of reading vlogs up for some of these as well. So the first book that I read was Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. This is the second book in the Last Hour series, and it came out at the beginning of March, and I got to do like a really exciting event for it as well, the launch tea party event with Cassandra Clare. I'll leave it linked on the screen or down below if you want to go check it out. But this was the first book that I finished in March, and I actually started it in April because I got to the arc early. And then the second book that I picked up in March and finished was Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi, and I actually kind of just picked this up on a weekend and finished the entire thing in a single vlog, so you can definitely go check that out. And then after that, I also picked up The Night Tiger by Yangzi Chu, which I had been meaning to pick up for a super long time, and I finally got around to it, and I was so happy that I kind of checked it off my list. And then I also got to a new release that I was super excited about, which was Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the third book in the Brown sisters kind of series. They're just companion novels, so they're not like completely connected together. There's a different main character for each one, but I loved the previous 2 books, and I was so excited to get this last one, and it was just the straight shot of serotonin that I needed in my life. But yes, so those are the 4 books that I read during March, and let's just get into my thoughts. Okay, it's really warm when I'm filming this, so I decided to put my hair up a little bit. So the first book that I read in March was Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. So in terms of non-spoilery thoughts, there's like basically nothing I can say. This was just mainly like 600 pages of pain and angst, and I loved it. It was just so great. And I just love, Cassandra Clare's characters and just the way that the Shadowhunter world works. It's just so interesting, and I love kind of the politics of it as well. But it's also just like really nice to see our characters together again and just like what they're up to. I think her characters are just ones that like kind of live rent-free in my brain, and I'm just always excited to get any kind of content with them. So yeah, it was just a lot of fun. And I think that I actually blew through this a lot quicker than I did with like the Dark Artifices series or even Chain of Gold. All those kind of took me a while, but this one was a little bit quicker. I also think because I was vlogging it the entire time. But I will say that I did basically a completely spoilery reading vlog for this, so definitely go check that out. And I don't think I'm going to really talk about my spoilery thoughts here because it's just going to be the same thing that I said in the vlog. But overall, this is really great, and I will say that miscommunication, it was just a main theme in this book. It felt like there were some major plot points that revolved around it, and I do feel like that's a plot device that Cassandra Clare has used a bunch of times before, so it's not completely surprising. So if you're someone who doesn't really like that, I would just, be mindful of that. But regardless, it was just a really great like Shadowhunter book to read, and I absolutely love like James and Cordelia and Matthew and just all of them with like every corner of my heart, and that was just really nice to see them. I do feel like this book also gives you a little bit more of an insight into Grace as a character, because she is someone that we tend to hate from Chain of Gold, from everything that she does. But I think this book gives you a little bit of her backstory, and you start to understand her actions a lot more, but I still think she's horrible, so there's that. And overall, the ending just killed me, so I don't know how to function after that, and I just need the next book. I need a Chain of Thorns to just come out so I can know how this ends. But yeah, I'm very scared for my babies, but also so curious to see what happens with all of the relationships and just the world. And there was just some really great twists in terms of like the villains and like some of the backstories that we got. So yeah, it was just really, really cool. And I do think I ended up enjoying this one a little bit more than Chain of Gold because we got to just see more of our characters doing cute and exciting things. All right, next we have Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi, and I also did a full reading vlog for this. I will say though that that one was a bit of a non-spoilery reading vlog, so I'll get into some spoilery thoughts here. But overall, for non-spoilery thoughts, this is just a really incredible and just amazing contemporary book. Mary H.K. Choi has a way of just bringing her settings to life and also her characters to life. This one is set in New York and you feel like you are living there, that you are, you know, walking the streets, that you are, you know, living in the grungy apartment that Jane is living in. But her characters are also just so vibrant and just so interesting to read about. They're super flawed, and just like the little details that she tells you about them just says so much about them. And so in that way, I just love Mary H.K. Choi's writing. Like, it just makes me so excited. But this is basically the story of two sisters, June and Jane, and follows the perspective of Jane, who is the younger sister. She's in college, and they're both living in New York City. And although they were really, really close when they were younger, their relationship has kind of deteriorated in the last few years. So this is kind of the story of them kind of coming back to each other, and it revolves around the inciting incident of June having cancer and a little bit of a lie that she is telling. And I definitely think that this is a book that if you love like reading about family drama or family relationships, this is a perfect book to pick up. Just reading about the relationship was just so interesting. They both really care for each other, but they also have a lot of built up resentment, which leads to a really interesting like dynamic between them. But I also just like love like the dialogue in this book. It's just so funny. Mary H.K. Choi has a very kind of like self-deprecating humor to the characters, which I loved. And I will say that this book has triggers for eating disorders, so be careful of that when you're picking it up. Jane specifically has an eating disorder, and it kind of plays throughout the book, and you know, as her emotional state fluctuates throughout the book, you see it come out more. But overall, this was an incredible, incredible book. And this also sort of touches upon June and Jane's relationship with their Korean American identity as well, which I thought was super interesting. So yeah, there's so many things about this book that was just so relatable and just so interesting, and I just love these characters. Like, they're just so raw and powerful, and I just cannot wait to see like more of what Mary H.K. Choi writes. So let's get into spoilers for this book, because it was just so incredible. And I honestly can't pinpoint all of these specific things that I loved about it, but there was just so many interesting twists that were going on, and just like the way that she crafts their relationship and the way that she writes it is just so cool. One thing that I did not see coming when I started this book was the whole insurance fraud like gamble that they were playing. The fact that June had stolen Jane's identity, like that was just wild to me, but I also like totally understood it. And it was so interesting to see how that lie was kind of affecting how they had to like come together again, and how Jane kind of got roped into all this. I also really loved like the really complicated relationship that Jane had with her mother, and like the whole scene with like her wearing the hanbok and her mother like getting really angry and telling her to take it off, and the whole situation of her mother like leaving for a few months and then coming back. Like, there's just so many like parts of this book where there are so many emotions hinging on a single moment from the past and how that has affected all of their lives later on. And so the whole like part where the two of them go back to their parents' place in Texas was just so interesting. I just love that whole line that her mother says about how you can't have everything, and how she sort of felt like her life was being whittled away by, you know, where she was and, you know, caring for her kids, and she doesn't feel like she was her own person. And also this idea of like the sister that they had between them, the one that, you know, her mother miscarried. That was also really interesting, and how the two of them kind of imagined her as like the perfect sister in between. That was like super interesting. Like, there's just so many things that were just so strange about this book, but also like really, really well done. All right, and then in terms of the relationships in this book, so like the whole Jeremy situation was just absolutely ridiculous, and I just did not understand why Jane was entertaining this guy, and like the whole situation where she was living in this place with him, but then he was bringing home these other girls, and like it was just so wild. But who I really loved was Patrick, and like the moment he walked in, I was like, yes, I love you, this is great. And like the way that they were connecting over their Asian American heritage, like the conversations that they had at his apartment, and I just like loved that whole thing. Like, it was just so great. And especially like when they were in the bedroom, but then he kind of like stops himself because she didn't seem like she was ready, and like that was great. But I did not see the whole thing of him being in an open relationship coming. Like, I was so pissed off when I read the part where they were in the grocery store. Also, that entire scene was just absolutely hilarious. But that scene in the grocery store where like they stumble upon him and like his, you know, perfectly perfect girlfriend, I did not see that coming at all. And he was just such a dick because he just acted like, you know, him and Jane had never interacted, and I was just so pissed off. But like, we get the explanation later on that he was in like this open relationship and that it wasn't going well, and that they do end up kind of breaking up, and then the two of them get together again. But still, I was like so pissed off about that slightly cheating element that he was lying, but like I also kind of get the whole situation. But they're still really cute and I really, really loved their dynamic. It was just like a little like annoying part to the story, but it was a nice twist as well. And then the last thing I think I loved about this was the ending of the book, and it was that scene at the very end where Jane is sitting with her mother after June has been taken in, and her mother is saying, you know, I'm so glad you're doing this for her, and you know, she's gonna have to do this for you. When you eventually want to have kids, you're gonna have to pretend to be June because Jane can technically, legally no longer have kids. And so that kind of whole full circle element of that was just so cool and interesting, and I love that, and it was just so poetic. And I just love how this entire book was just like so poetically like pulled together. Like there was just so many parallels between the two sisters, and the idea of like Jane feeling like she was just a copy of her sister, that she never felt like a different person from her sister, but also just the idea of them being like inseparable and still being so intricately entwined. Like I just loved that. It was just so amazing, and I like just cried at the end of this book. It was just so emotional and I loved it, and I just like felt so much for these characters. They were just so raw and powerful, and like the way that this book was written was just so incredible. So yeah, amazing book. Like definitely one of my all-time favorites for this year, for like ever, and it's definitely going to be on my top 10 books of the year list at the end of this year. Alright, the third book that I picked up in March was The Night Tiger by Yang Zi-Chu, and I had been meaning to pick this up for super long. I don't particularly have any spoilery thoughts that I really want to share about this one, so I'm just going to do a non-spoilery review. But mainly what I loved about this was that it was set in Malaysia, in colonial Malaysia in the 1930s, and the entire setting was just so cool. Yang Zi-Chu kind of like breathes so much life into it. There's so much diversity in Malaysia, and it was just really interesting to be in that setting, and I've never read a book like in that setting, so that was really cool. Another thing I loved was our main character Jilin, or one of the main characters, Jilin. She's this young apprentice dressmaker, but she also works as a dance hall girl to kind of pay off her mother's debts. And I loved her just as a character, but I also just loved her voice in the book. Just like hearing her talk about anything, I just like loved it. And I actually listened to most of this through the audiobook, which is actually narrated by Yang Zi-Chu herself, which I thought was super cool. So yeah, if you're gonna pick up the audiobook, highly recommend. But this book was like quite weird and interesting in a lot of ways because it's both like kind of a contemporary story, but also has a little bit of a supernatural element to it with this whole night tiger thing. And it's a bit of a murder mystery as well, because there are these women who are getting viciously killed by some sort of creature, and everyone thinks it's kind of a tiger, but other people think that they might be murdered. So it was just really interesting. And I think to a certain extent, I feel like I took too many breaks in between reading this, and so I didn't get the full experience of like reading it. But on Jilin's side, there's this whole backstory of her mother getting remarried to like this other man, and so it becomes Jilin's stepfather, but her stepfather also had a son himself who was actually born on the same day as Jilin, and that ends up being Shin, who ends up being her kind of, you know, stepbrother. But there's this kind of undeniable connection between them, and this whole romance kind of plays a large part in the book as well, which I thought was super interesting. And then there's another main character who is the 11-year-old Chinese houseboy named Ren, and he's just a really interesting character because he seems a lot older than he actually is, and he is where I feel like the whole supernatural element really comes into play. And I feel like Jilin's story felt very like contemporary, and like if you had taken out the supernatural elements, her story could have just been like a contemporary romance, if you will, in this setting, which I thought was really interesting. So I feel like I ended up actually enjoying those parts a lot more than I enjoyed the other parts of the book. But still, I thought that the supernatural elements were kind of cool and interesting, and I was very intrigued by them and the whole mystery of it, and the mystery of like the murders as well. And it does have some really interesting twists by the end, I think, and just the way that things kind of work out by the end, I really enjoyed. So that was interesting. And overall, I think it was like an enjoyable read. It definitely wasn't my favorite, I will say, but I think it was really interesting, and it definitely had its merits, and it was certainly unlike anything I've read before. Alright, and the final book that I have to talk about is Act Your Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. I was so excited to pick this up, and I think I'm most going to talk about like non-spoilery thoughts for this. I don't think I have specific spoilery thoughts that I want to talk about. I think it was just overall a really great romance, and like there was just some really cute parts, but I don't think I have anything specific that I want to comment on. But in terms of like non-spoiler thoughts, this was just so much fun. If you've read any of the previous Brown Sisters books, then you know what you're kind of getting into, and I think that out of the three, I can't really decide which one I love the most, but I definitely liked Dani Brown and Eve Brown a little bit more than I liked Chloe Brown's story, but this one was just so cute because it starts off as an enemies to lovers situation, and like it was like really kind of strong at the beginning because Eve doesn't know what she's doing with her life. She's been popping around different jobs and, you know, different careers, and she's now like 28 and doesn't know what she's doing with her life. And when she has another business that kind of fails, her parents are like, what are you doing? You need to get your act together. You need to act your age. So they're like, we are going to cut you off from your trust fund and you have to find a way to hold down a job for a year or else we're going to throw you out. And that's basically the ultimatum that they give her. And so Eve, being the very dramatic person that she is, kind of drives off into the night and ends up at this little bed and breakfast, which is owned by Jacob Wayne, our male love interest. And it's this really cute situation where, you know, he is trying to hire a new cook, but he can't find anyone. And then Eve kind of shows up, but she's exactly like not the type of person that he would have hired. She's just all over the place. She just kind of does an interview on the whim. And she also accidentally hits him with her car. And so he ends up breaking his arm or like spraining it. And so the two of them end up in the situation where they're running the inn together. And then it ends up turning into like a friendship and then definitely a romance, and the sexual tension in this was just off the charts, let me tell you. Like, oh my god, it was so good. And like all of the steamy bits were just so great. I loved them. They were just fantastic. I think I liked the ones in Dani Brown and this one the best. And I definitely think she goes into more depth than she did in the previous Brown sister books, I felt like. So that was also interesting. But yeah, I just loved like Eve as a character. She was really endearing, and I loved like the struggle that she kind of goes through to understand herself and understand why, you know, so many people thought that she was kind of flaky and, you know, disorderly and just didn't know what she was doing. And there is an aspect of autism rep in this book as well. So like that was a major aspect, and I think that it made for a really rich story, and you know, the two characters just coming to understand themselves was just really interesting. And I just loved the way that they cared for each other. They were just so cute, and I just loved this entire book. It was just so cute and so much fun, and I loved it so much. Alright, well those are the 4 books that I read in March. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I apologize for not going into more spoilery thoughts, but I just don't really have that much to say, so I don't really think there's a point to adding them. But regardless, yeah, I had a lot of fun with all of these books, and I'm so excited for all of the books that are on my TBR for April. But yeah, I'm just kind of finding that it's like hard to balance my full-time job and like YouTube and just like, you know, having time to just chill out with also reading. So it's been a little bit of a difficult time, but I'm, you know, trying to get it together. So if anyone has any tips for like trying to read more when you don't have that much time, let me know them down below. But yeah, overall, I just like really enjoyed these books. I think I had a pretty amazing reading month as well, so I'm excited about that. But yeah, that's what I have. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts about each of these books down below, because I would love to hear what you guys thought of them and what you're thinking. And also let me know what you guys read in March as well, because I love to hear what you guys think of the books that you're reading. But I will see you in my next video, so please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!